We are living, as I said, in very strange times, and even words are, difficult or hard to describe or capture exactly what is going on. But we want to focus tonight on a particular area, a particular phenomenon, and maybe this is as a side effect or a backlash of the pandemic. But from racism to homophobia to religious, ethnic, or class hatred, there is a rising tide of hate that has pushed global society to the brink, particularly in certain parts of the world. They say if we understand why we behave a certain way, we can hope to change the way we behave. I also want to add that we find ourselves in a particular unique moment in the Jewish calendar, the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av, which is certainly the most tragic day in Jewish history, commemorating, amongst others, the destruction of both temples. And the Talmud has a very cryptic but insightful statement saying that the cause, because there always is a spiritual cause to events, to global events, was, as the Talmud coins the phrase, sinat chinam, baseless hatred. So, and obviously it's 1900, 2000 years later, the Jewish people are still in galut, still in exile. So I think we want to try and better understand the nature and the dynamic of hate. So if I can begin with a very simple question for you, Rabbi Friedman, why do we hate?
Well, it would be easy and pointless to simply say we are nasty people, so we are jealous, we are greedy, we are petty, and we are hateful. We're just not nice creatures with many ugly features. But that doesn't really answer the question. In order to understand hatred, blatant, ugly hatred, we have to find the predecessors. What was this hatred before it became so ugly? What spawned it? To give it a positive spin, we are very frustrated at the imperfections of the world. We're losing tolerance and patience for the imperfections of the world. And so every time we see something that isn't exactly as we think it should be, we just don't have any patience for it. And we hate it. When you focus all that hatred on somebody and say, you're the reason the world is all messed up. Okay, that's the ugly underbelly of our discontent. But we're living through a time of global discontent, which means we need to reinvent life. And that's a good thing. But to blame it on somebody or on some group, that's a cheap shot.
So the question then is, why is there that tendency to blame others? And how do, as you say, this is a cheap shot, this is diversion, this is deflection of the true cause of the problem. Why do people do that? And what can be done in order to change that?
So what is the alternative, in other words?
Correct.
I'm feeling frustrated with the imperfections of the world. Rather than blaming someone, what should I do? So here's the thing. My frustration demands a solution. Blaming someone is not a solution. It's simply a way of venting, but it doesn't solve anything. So the alternative to blaming is to take responsibility, not as the cause of the problem, but as the potential master of the universe, or partners with God in the universe. So God gave us the ability to change the realities that we see. As Adam and Eve were told, I'm putting you in the Garden of Eden to work the garden and to protect the garden. You're not there to sit back and enjoy. You're born to do. But, the lazy impulse in us, rather than getting up and doing something about it, I simply discharge all my frustrations by blaming somebody, and I kind of feel better, but I didn't solve anything.
So going back to hate, I mean, obviously this is something that a lot of us, most people, possess: hate, resentment in varying degrees in their hearts. How does that come about? Meaning, are we naturally as human beings disposed one way or another? Is there, would you say, a natural state for children to be more loving of others, or not so?
What we see in children are both impulses, and what they're reflecting is the intolerance to what is uncomfortable. To the degree that you're intolerant, to that degree you are angry or resentful. So we all deal with things that we're not comfortable with. And we should be uncomfortable. There's a moral component here. If you're not uncomfortable with evil, if you're not uncomfortable with ugliness, then you're becoming part of that evil and part of that ugliness. So that discomfort, that rejection, that moral outrage is absolutely necessary. But moral outrage should be focused. I'm upset with the immorality. I'm upset with the imperfection of the universe, which begs for perfection. So I can do my share to make the world better. Children are very intolerant of anything that makes them uncomfortable. Often they express it more in fear than in hatred. But they have terrible tempers, these little kids, which is an intolerance. Used properly, that is a powerful moral tool. Used improperly, it becomes terribly destructive. So here's the underlying cause to the dark ugliness of hatred. It all comes from jealousy. I am uncomfortable with the fact that you have what I want, or that you have more than me, even though I don't even want it. But there's an inherent unfairness, an inequality, an imbalance. So the symmetry is off, and that disturbs me. I want everything to be perfectly balanced, perfectly aligned, perfectly symmetrical, and then I can relax. Again, a good thing. But that symmetry needs to be created. On the other hand, there's a certain power and attraction to that which is not symmetrical. In advertising, they have this, put the picture a little off center and it'll get more attention. So God created a world that is asymmetrical. People are not equal. There are the rich and there's the poor. There are the strong and there's the weak. There are the entitled and the unentitled. Exactly the way God created the world. That is not human discrimination. That's natural discrimination. Among the animals, there are the hunters and there are the huntees. Right? There are those that are more powerful than others, and they have them for lunch. So there's a natural built-in asymmetry to nature. That motivates us, that inspires us to seek the symmetrical, to bring about a balance, to bring about a harmony. And the disharmony is actually inspiring. It gets our attention and it makes us get up and do something. But those who notice the discomfort with the asymmetrical and then simply react with anger and frustration, they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. So what is jealousy? Jealousy is a reaction to an asymmetrical world. Why isn't everybody equally beautiful? Why isn't everybody equally strong, equally smart, equally rich? Why? Because each of us has an individual, tailor-made mission for why we are here in this world. That's a positive thing, not a negative thing. And because we each have our unique condition, asymmetrical, that's why when we all do our little piece, our unique, individualized mission, together it will result in a great harmony where the world will come together like a perfect puzzle with every piece fitting perfectly, and the result is a more godly universe here on earth than is possible in heaven.
So let me ask you like this. Two questions come to mind. Number one, focusing on the times in which we find ourselves, particularly over the recent past, where it's clear to all there is massive polarization across the world, politically, socially, and that is getting stronger and stronger, more heated, more animated. And where there was in the past dialogue, discussion, respect for another person's view, today that is less so. And that trend seems to be getting stronger and stronger. My question is, how, just to better understand the trend and the causes of that trend, how do you explain why, particularly in our times, in the recent past, that polarization is getting stronger and stronger, the hate, the anger, the envy, as you mentioned, is more and more animated?
Probably because the intolerance has gotten stronger. See, when you have two people, like you say, totally polarized, which means that each of them carries an irrational opinion that they can't even discuss, what they have in common is that they are both completely frustrated. So we're actually more the same, more alike than we want to admit. We're both frustrated, we're both dissatisfied with the world as it is, and we have no more tolerance for it. That's kind of a prelude to Moshiach. Before we can have that perfect world, we have to have a thorough rejection of the imperfections that we've been living with. As long as there's still some tolerance for it, we're not going to have the alternative, the perfect world. So I think we're going through that now. Everyone is intolerant. We're just not sure what we're intolerant about. But everybody's intolerant about something, about nothing, about everything. Because the world as it is now is no longer acceptable. We finally got there.
So, in other words, the cause of the frustration is the intolerance, and fundamentally you're saying we're aligned in the causes of that frustration, only we pretend to have different views that justify that intolerance.
Because we're looking for an excuse and a reason. Why is the world so terrible? Oh, it's your fault. Instead of trying to figure out why the world is terrible, we should figure out what the alternative is. I'm going to tell you this really amazing story. Rabbi Lau, the former chief rabbi, Rabbi Lau Sr., an incredible man. He went from hiding in a burlap bag slung over the shoulders of his brother in the concentration camps, and that's how he survived, to becoming the chief rabbi of Israel. An amazing story. But when he speaks, he often tells of his visit to the Rebbe, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They spoke about all the problems in Israel and all the problems of the Jewish communities around the world. And then Rabbi Lau said to the Rebbe, what's going to be? Was wird sein? With all these problems, what's going to be? The Rebbe's answer to him was, rather than ask what's going to be, let's ask what more we can do to make things better. Rabbi Lau quotes the Rebbe often. The first time I heard it from him, I thought, what's wrong with asking what's going to be? Seems like a pretty relevant question. So the Rebbe could have said, well, let's talk about what more we can do. But why did he dismiss or reject the question of what's going to be? So my first thought was, this is how my mind works. My first thought was, what's going to be is a depressing question. Let's not go there. But of course, that didn't sound like the Rebbe at all. Not the Rebbe's style, character, nothing. So think again. I thought what the Rebbe was doing is focusing on the practical. What's going to be, we really can't control. But what more we can do, that's practical. That we can make a plan and do it. Still didn't sound like the Rebbe. My third thought was, if you were to ask the Rebbe what's going to be, what would the Rebbe's answer be? The Rebbe's answer would be, what kind of question is that? What's going to be? It's going to be wonderful. Mashiach is going to come. The world is going to serve God in harmony. Everything will be good. There will be no more illness, no more pain, no more tears. What's going to be? What kind of question is that? We know what's going to be, and it's going to be wonderful. Now, if you really believe that, then you have no further questions, right? So the Rebbe says, no. It's going to be wonderful, and you still have a question. The question is, what more can we do? Knowing that the result or the end is going to inevitably, without question, without doubt, it's going to be great. But to think that it's going to become great without any contribution from me? What am I, a spectator? Chopped liver? I don't want it to happen without me. I want to feel like I contributed. So what's going to be? Don't even bother asking. We know the answer. Does that mean we don't have to do anything? On the contrary, it's going to be that great and I'll have no part in it. So let's think about what more we can do. Our little piece. Because that's what we're here for.
But, following that thought, which is obviously, sums up the Rebbe in a way. In other words, the Rebbe put it that for thousands of years, the conventional wisdom or even attitude and approach to the future was a Jew waits for Mashiach, right? And even in the prayers, we await, we eagerly await, but it's a sort of passive state. The Rebbe introduced from the very beginning, but with more pronounced and overtly later on, that you don't wait for Mashiach, you bring Mashiach. Lahavi li moisa Mashiach. So we are must be proactive in order to make it happen. The question is, with all of that, if you would ask, if you would take the poll or the pulse of the Jewish people, including and perhaps especially, let's just say, religious Jews across the spectrum, how do you think they honestly live their day-to-day lives? Is it, are we waiting for Mashiach, or am I bringing Mashiach?
That is a very good point, because the Rebbe revolutionized the entire concept. Traditionally, like you say, it was a matter of waiting. And the wish, the prayer was, Delebn Moshiach. I just want to live long enough to see it happen. Very passive. But more than that, people believed that you're supposed to believe in Moshiach. And the stronger your belief, the better. The Rebbe, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, of course, the Rebbe said, I don't want to believe in Mashiach anymore. We've believed in Mashiach for 2,000 years, and that was right, that was necessary, that was appropriate. But now that we're this close to Mashiach, believing is no longer valuable. I don't want to believe in Mashiach, I want to see Mashiach. I don't want to wait for him to come, I want to make it happen. So belief implies that it's still mysterious, it's still far off, unreachable, and the best you can do is believe in it. To put it very, very practically, the first thing that's going to change when Mashiach comes, we won't believe in Mashiach coming. That mitzvah or that obligation, that cardinal principle of faith, you must believe that Mashiach will come. Okay, he came. Now we're down to 12 principles of faith. And then the dead will be resurrected, and that will be down to 11. So the Rebbe was saying, you're not doing God a favor by believing in Mashiach. It's time to bring Mashiach. As long as we're believing, it means he's not here. But we don't want that anymore. See, that's the intolerance in the world of holiness. In the world of holiness, the intolerance to Golus has become much stronger recently. Certainly in the Rebbe's world, the Ad Mosai, the intolerance is intense. And therefore, telling me to believe is not an answer. We have been believing. So in a sense, we are intolerant of the fact that we have to believe in Mashiach, which means he's still not here. Now that intolerance is mirrored or mimicked by the unholy, and it becomes an intolerance of each other, an intolerance of groups, individuals, just a world of intolerance. But we can use it in a constructive way.
So focusing on that intolerance for a moment, because what you're saying is that in order to quicken that pace of transition from an exilic state, from a Golos state to a redemptive state, and let me just throw in there at this moment to characterize the times, Messianic age, that utopian age, because the Rambam, Maimonides, gives very clear description of those times. And one of the things he says is, it's a time, and I quote from the book, the Mishnah Torah, his Code of Jewish Law, where he writes, there will be no more famine, no more war, no more envy, and no more, let's call it, destructive competition, right? So if we want to reject, in your words, have that deep intolerance towards the exilic state, that translates into a world filled with hate and envy. But what seems to be happening is that there is more hate and envy. So are we getting closer in, during this period where what seems to be happening is going backwards, further away from that messianic age, and certainly not a step closer?
Which is why we need these conversations that we're having right now. It's crucial. But it's just a matter of adjustment. We're frustrated, we're intolerant. All we have to do is fine-tune it to apply that intolerance and that frustration where it belongs. So we're on the right track, but we need a little fine-tuning to get it to exactly to where it belongs and to where it's productive. It's interesting how the Rambam you're quoting. There will be no war, there will be no hunger, there will be no competition. Those are the things that we can't tolerate anymore. It's a perfect description of. We're also, maybe this is a bonus, we're also intolerant of death itself. We have never been so intolerant of death. We've always accepted it as an inevitability. Taxes and death. The two things that are inevitable. Like a comedian say, yeah, but taxes go up every year. They're not the same.
Death happens later, no? We're living longer.
Yeah, first you pay your taxes, then you die. There's never been an intolerance of death. Now we're intolerant of that too. Because why should there be death? Who says it's inevitable? Why have we made peace with it? So all of this unrest, all of this discomfort is all based in holiness, but reflected, like a negative, it reflects backwards and becomes evil, but only because of a lack of light. It's a matter of education. It's a matter of simply informing people and helping them understand their own intolerance and frustration. So if you meet a guy who's really angry and hateful and resentful, you can honestly say to him, I am in perfect agreement with your frustration. You are totally entitled. The frustration is genuine and it's warranted and it's even holy. But don't abuse it. Don't misuse it. Apply it in the way that it needs to be applied, and you will become the cause of the solution and no longer part of the problem.
I think it was Alan Dershowitz who once said 90%, he was talking about Jews, but I guess it's true for all mankind, 90% we have in common, 10% we don't have in common. The problem is that 90% of the time we're focusing on the 10%. So what you're saying is that the true cause of all that frustration and anger we have in common. It's just, for whatever reason, we haven't figured that out. And I don't know what it will take, but obviously, hopefully we do, sooner rather than later. We mentioned before the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, explains that based on the Talmud, the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. Whereas the first temple was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins: murder, adultery, and idolatry. And he makes a fascinating point. He says the first temple was rebuilt in the second temple after 70 years. And the second temple, which was destroyed because of baseless hatred, was still in exile 2,000 years later. So obviously, this baseless hatred is something very serious, so serious that it seems to be part of who we are, embedded in us. What do you think it will take for us to heal that condition?
That's a powerful, powerful observation. The Rebbe makes a similar observation concerning Egypt. Moshe was puzzled. Why are we in exile for so long? Why are we enslaved for so long? It doesn't make sense. And then he saw two Jews fighting. And he said, oh, I get it. We're still in exile because we haven't become one people. Not because of the sin of fighting. It's not a punishment for a sin. We are not ready to become a healthy people when we can't get along. So it's not a punishment for a sin. It's simply a resistance to redemption. If we keep fighting, we are not allowing the possibility of Mashiach. So again, let's go back to the origins. Where does this friction come from? So when you think about it, the early Zionist dream of a Jewish state was like at the end of the 1800s, right? The situation with the Jewish population in the world in the late 1800s was that a large segment of the Jewish population lived in Europe, Eastern Europe, in large countries, some very large countries, like Russia, Soviet Union, even Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, large countries, certainly compared to Israel. And then somebody comes along and says, I've had a dream. Let's all go to Israel. Turns out it wasn't a dream, it was a nightmare. You're taking Jews from large countries who couldn't get along. The Russians and the Ukrainians and the Galicianer and the Poles and the White Russians against the other, and Romania, and nobody got along. So you're taking all these people who live in wide open countries with plenty of space between them, and you're saying, let's squeeze them all into a little country and let's see what happens. Whoever survives wins. You know? What kind of plan was that? What was he thinking? My guess is he was thinking that the reason we don't get along is because Russians and Ukrainians don't get along. So if you have Russian Jews and Ukrainian Jews, they're not going to get along. But how about if we stop being Ukrainian and we stop being Polish and we stop being Russian and we stop being Hungarian, just go back to being Jews. We would get along fabulously. So he gathered Jews back to Israel and said, now we're just Jews. So what happened? What went wrong? Well, if you take a look at the culture in Israel, nobody is just a Jew. You're either Haredi, or you're Chiloni, or you're religious, or you're fanatical religious, or you're black hat, or you're knitted yarmulke, or you're right-wing politician politically, or you're left-wing politically. Nobody's just Jewish. So instead of being Ukrainian and Polish, we've become religious and secular. We've become all these titles, all these labels are keeping us in our state of friction and frustration. if we simply went back to being Jews, the Rebbe's project of the Tefillin campaign, you stop a guy in the street and say, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" That is so powerful. Just that alone, before we even get to the Tefillin. "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" That's all I need to know. I'm not asking if you're a philosopher. I'm not asking if you're religious. I'm not asking if you're spiritual. I'm not asking you what your beliefs are, whether you're waiting for Mashiach, not waiting for Mashiach. The only thing that's relevant to me is, are you a fellow Jew? If we could promote that attitude, we would be moving in the right direction. A fellow Jew, that's all I need to know. And if you're my fellow Jew, I want to get closer to you. I want to do you a favor. I want to bridge the gap between us. In whatever way. A physical favor, a spiritual favor, whatever.
Let's zoom in a little on that, okay? Because I think that's, you've identified a core cause in the tension and the friction between fellow Jews, okay? There are a lot of communities, there are a lot of groups. We're talking amongst Jews, a lot of ideologies. You look in the world, you look in any Jewish neighborhood, there are many different types of shuls. There are particular affiliations that there's a greater affinity within your group. You're Chabad. I would guess that you feel more comfortable, correct me if I'm wrong, amongst that particular group in which you were brought up and you share similar ideologies. And that's true in every group. And that's the way we're taught, family, schools, community, ideology. We promote a particular, let's call it, brand of Judaism. Because of which we almost, if I can say that, not just feel comfortable amongst our own, more so than others, but maybe even feel a little superior.
Perish the
thought. My question is like this, because you've coined it nicely, and in theoretical terms, it sounds very nice, that to go back to being Jewish, let's talk about Jews in the desert. They received the Torah, it's one size fits all, there's one large community. Yes, there's lots of problems there, but you don't have the labelings, or not as much, as you do today. How, on a practical level, would you suggest that Jews, communities, and the leaders leading these communities bring the Jews back home to that pristine state?
I think that's why Chabad is so tuned to the outside world, because it was never meant to be a parochial movement supporting itself. Being in your comfort zone, yes, it is more comfortable. And yes, there's a feeling of superiority, for sure. Otherwise, why would I choose to be this and not something else? Of course, because I think this is the best. So there's a comfort level there, and there's a certain pleasure to being among your own. But there is no inspiration. There's nothing inspiring about that. Only when I meet someone who doesn't agree with me, who is different, that's inspiring. Also challenging. If I really believe that what I have is the best in the world, I should be able to share it with everybody. That's inspiring, that's challenging, that's meaningful. The other, being just with yourself among your own, well, yeah, that's pleasurable and comfortable. That's not what we're here for. We're not looking for pleasure or for comfort. The Rebbe, I just recently heard the Rebbe said to somebody, the Rebbe asked him to go on a mission. He was an Orthodox rabbi, and I think it had to do with Russia back in the bad old days. And he asked him to do something, and he came back and he said, I did it, but it was not easy. And so the Rebbe said to him, did you sign a contract with God for an easy life? Is easy the definition of right and wrong? Of what's easy? Easy doesn't mean anything. So you're right. It's very comfortable to be among our own, even to criticize each other and to find our own faults. But that's not inspiring. To meet a Jew in the street who has no idea what you believe, what you think, what you practice, what you know, there's a challenge. If you're so right, it should make sense to him too. So try it. The Rebbe was not afraid to send young couples, inexperienced, maybe even immature, send them out to a community, one-way ticket, don't come back, spend the rest of your life dealing with a community that does not agree with you on almost anything, and also didn't invite you. And what's going to happen? Well, if what we have is valid, if what we have is real, you will affect your environment. If not, you'll be affected by your environment. The Rebbe was so confident. It gave us confidence too.
So, in other words, to the degree that an individual feels secure and comfortable with their ideology, they are willing and able to test that against people with different views and different mindsets.
How does that song go? One who believes is not afraid of losing his belief.
Exactly. Moving on, again, going back to another phrase mentioned in that same Maimer Hasidic discourse, the Rebbe quotes that the sin of baseless hatred is equivalent to the three transgressions, the cardinal sins of idol worship and idolatry and murder. The Talmud is known for making very drastic, cryptic statements. I'm sure you've heard that and you've learned that and repeated that many, many times. How do you begin to understand that? How can you explain that?
The Rebbe is not suggesting, and the Gemara is not saying, that baseless hatred is a bigger sin than idolatry or adultery or murder. It's not a bigger sin. But a sin can be forgiven, and then you're fine. When you resist a cure, then you can't be cured. So the baseless hatred is simply, it's resisting Geula. You're not letting yourself be redeemed. It's almost like you're fighting to stay in Golos. Well, then what do you expect? So it's not a bigger sin, but it's a more like among illnesses. There are illnesses that are very dangerous, mortal, and then there are illnesses that are simply resistant. They don't accept the cure. So baseless hatred is more resistant of holiness. It's not a bigger sin, but it does prevent geula more than a sin, because a sin can be forgiven. You can do tshuva.
So let me ask you. Yeah.
Doing tshuva is a big part of bringing Mashiach.
So let's try to understand that, and I guess this is in a way the crux of the issue. we know, we can name, we can identify, maybe there are similarities with this corona or the COVID-19 can act a little as a metaphor for this. So we know, we can identify the name of this condition that has prevented the Jewish people from returning to Israel for 2,000 years. That's a long time. And by the way, there are a lot of great Jews who have achieved a lot of great things over that period. And yet, we're still here. And we can name and we can identify the cause, the condition that prevents Geula. It's not even our list. It's one cure with two words. Okay? It's called sinas chinam, which we translate as baseless hatred. Why do we continue to almost hold on, and maybe even desperately hold on to this condition when we are aware, to a certain degree, of this acting as a prevention to the greatest good, almost a good that is a win-win. Everyone's a winner, I believe, pretty much, when the Mashiach comes. Okay? It's good. It's good. There'll be plenty of it. It's not a zero-sum game anymore. And yet, it continues to be part of who we are, even good Jews, from Jews, religious Jews, pious Jews. It continues to be part of who we are. Why is it that we hold on to it? It has become so much a part of us.
So you were saying there's a metaphor in the virus?
Yes.
How so?
I say we don't know much about it, but we know its name, and we know that it can affect anyone, anywhere, anytime, in a negative way. Yet it's still a bit of a mystery as to how it works.
Well, the biggest problem, the identifiable problem, is that this sinas chinam is justified on religious grounds. I'm supposed to object to your way of doing things. If I don't object, if I don't condemn you, then I'm not doing my job. Something that Rebbe fought against intensely, bitterly. When rabbis or leaders, teachers come out publicly and blame all our problems on that one's sin and this one's sin, and you got to stop doing that. It's not helpful, and it's not what God requires of us, and there's nothing holy about it. You're not going to become a bigger tzaddik by exposing the sins of others. And yet, it's an old habit, I think, and it's the Baal Shem Tov 300 years ago fought against this attitude and taught us the opposite and gave us an alternative way of thinking. But we need to share it more with others. If you justify, you prolong. Take away the justification, and it's a lot easier to get rid of the problem. So no, you're not a very moral person when you blame others for their immorality. It doesn't make you a tzaddik. So don't do that. Certainly, relieve yourself of that obligation. You're not obligated to be critical and condemning.
Well, if I can just ask a question on that. Obviously, one of the 613 commandments, the mitzvah to rebuke or reprimand, I think the Rebbe once, it might even have been to Rabbi Sachs, Lord Rabbi Sachs, previous chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, who wrote in his thesis to the Rebbe on the subject and used the word rebuke to translate Hecheach Techiach Esamisacha. And the Rebbe said he believed there was better words to be used. I think subsequently he found out that rebuke comes from the French word, Old French, meaning to break. And obviously the Rebbe didn't like that word because heichacha is not to break, it's to build and make someone better. But to a lot of religious Jews, that's a 613 mitzvah, part of the mitzvahs, to reprimand, and we have responsibility, and everyone's responsible for each other. Otherwise, we're implicated, we're an accomplice. So how do you switch that great responsibility we all have to influence and impact and take responsibility for others from a negative, as in the rebuke, to a positive? How does that work?
Did the Rebbe offer an alternative word?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
I just find it fascinating that a rabbi from Brooklyn is correcting a British rabbi in his English.
He was, at the time, he was a student at Cambridge University.
Yeah.
So my question in a concise terms is, how do we switch that, let's just say, sense of responsibility that people have, because of which we're pointing the negative in others, to influencing in a positive way?
So the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, rebuke is appropriate if you're talking about someone who is as educated in Torah as you and is yet misbehaving. Then what could be missing? Maybe a few strongly worded reminders of what's right and wrong. We'll put them back on the right path. But if you're talking to somebody who has not been educated, rebuke is totally inappropriate. Educate him. You're rebuking him as if he is refusing to do the mitzvah. He doesn't know the mitzvah. What are you rebuking? And even if he knows the mitzvah, nothing ever inspired him. So give him inspiration. Rebuke is the last thing when you've tried everything else. He's educated, he's inspired, he knows, and yet he doesn't behave. Then rebuke is appropriate, helpful. Otherwise, it's not called for. Educate. And here's an important thing. You can read the Torah and become as aggressive and as violent as Taliban. Yes, it says in the Torah that for this sin you get this punishment. How are we supposed to respond to that? God makes certain people poor and hungry. What's our response? Feed them. God makes people sick. What is our response? Find the cure. Heal them. God puts certain people in dangerous circumstances. Our job? Save them. That's like Judaism 101. When God says to Moshe, the people are deserving of punishment, what's Moshe's job? To defend. So we don't say, oh, people are poor. They're probably meant to be poor. That's good. Fine. It's what God wants. When God says, I think this person should be punished, our job is to say, he doesn't deserve punishment. He didn't mean it. It wasn't intentional. He'll do better next time. We defend. We always defend. So even if you find a quote in the Torah that says that you should rebuke and you should condemn, our job is to defend. It's not holy and it's not virtuous to approve of God's judgments. We approve of God's kindness. We participate in God's kindness. We're not invited to participate in God's judgment. That's just not Jewish. But there's this beautiful thing. In one of the infamous debates between the church and the rabbi. The spokesman for the church asked the rabbi, and I remember who it was. I don't think it was the Ramban. But he asked the rabbi, why is your God so harsh, so punishing? The rabbi's answer was magnificent. The rabbi said, your God is not punishing, so you end up doing the punishing yourself. We would rather leave it to God. If there's to be rebuke, if there's to be suffering, if there's to be punishment, leave it up to God. I don't participate in that. I go in the opposite direction. Avraham argued in the defense of Sodom, even after God told him specifically, I'm going to punish them because they're exceedingly evil. What's Avram's problem? And then I read a beautiful medrash. I've never seen it before. An obvious question. God tells Moshe while he's up on the mountain, go down. Your people have corrupted themselves. They've made a graven image. Moshe comes down carrying the luchos, carrying the tablets, the 10 Commandments. He sees them worshiping an idol. He throws them down and breaks them. The obvious question is, why did he bring them down at all? When God told him that the Jews had made a graven image, he should have left the Torah where it was. Why bring it down and then break it? Medrash says, listen to this is amazing. The Medrash says, Moshe did not believe that the Jews would make an idol. Not until he saw it with his own eyes did he give up on the luchos. Now, wait a minute. Who told him that the Jews had made an idol? God himself. And Moshe said, nah, don't believe it. See, that's Jewish. God might judge them as having made an idol. But on a human level, nah, come on.
You see, this is all, it's very inspiring. It's very uplifting. It's certainly empowering, this view, this approach, that we are in fact partners with God. So God creates an imperfect world, wanting to empower us, inviting us to become, equity stakeholders in this enterprise. And we are fixing God's world, which is, if you think about it, it's an extraordinary statement. I think the problem lies in many people, Jews included, can't believe that they matter as much as God has invited them to matter. I mean, do you think that's an issue? And what do we do to educate and let people know, hey, you're more responsible than you think.
I'm really glad you brought that up. It's my favorite subject. We're educated in the yeshiva to understand and appreciate how much we need him. Can't move without him, can't succeed without him, can't live without him. Can't. We're so dependent on him. We need him so much. And that's Judaism. That's Judaism 1. That's what you tell children. And it's true. But it's fundamental, basic, beginner's Judaism. The truth of Judaism is, how much he needs us. Otherwise, how are we serving him? Focusing on how much we need him doesn't encourage serving him. It becomes self-serving. I need him to take care of me. That's not Judaism. It's a fact of life, of course. True of everything in the world. Without God's attention, the tree can't exist. That's not Judaism. That's the venue. That's where Judaism needs to be carried out. But being dependent on God is not Judaism. We kind of neglect in the yeshiva. We neglect the real message or punchline of what Torah reveals, because it's a revelation. It reveals God's need for us. Our need for him we would know without God, without a Torah. It's a neglected subject, and it's sad.
Well, do you perhaps this is also related to the current world in which we find ourselves, where society has become more dependent on government, on big business, on the greater forces. Years ago, you had President Kennedy. Obviously, one of his speechwriters wrote him a great speech in his inauguration. And there, the battle cry was, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which is not just a practical way of getting more out of the people, but on the contrary, they become partners, they become empowered, they become happier as individuals. Do you think that things are becoming worse in that vein? People becoming more dependent?
Great so. But it's also interesting that that speech is so popular. Of all the inaugural speeches, you ask any American or anyone in the world, do you remember any inaugural speeches? That's the one they come up with. And that's the one where something is demanded of you, not promised to you. So not only was it a great message, it was so popular. It still is popular, which is encouraging. Gives me a little hope. People love to be given responsibility. We just fail to do it. So God will take care. God will take care of you. Just trust in God. He'll take care of you. God is not my valet. So I was talking to a Christian minister who has been in his position, has been ministering for 45 years or more. He asks me very innocently, he says, do you believe in the Savior? So I said, I'm really not looking for God to serve me. I want to serve him. And this man started to cry. He said, I never even thought of that. How does it make sense? God exists to serve me? It's really a crucial, fundamental principle in Torah. Ivdu es Hashem. We are here to serve him. And when we daven and we ask God for all sorts of blessings, it's only so that we can serve him. We're asking God, you take care of our needs because we want to be busy taking care of your needs. That's Avodas Hashem.
Yeah, look, it's very counterintuitive, and I mean, I guess what I'm trying to understand is if it's so empowering, how come leaders today, let's talk about political leaders without getting into the politics, how come political leaders don't use that attitude, that approach? You just don't hear it.
And it's true of teachers and yeshivas also. Why do we have this unspoken and unquestioned assumption that unless I offer something for you, unless I bribe you to do the right thing, you're not going to do it? It's underestimating human beings. It's underestimating our children. It's not true. We love being challenged in our altruism, in our selflessness. We love it. You don't have to pay me every time I do something right. The Rebbe told a shliach who had written to the Rebbe, he reported some activity that he had done. He didn't get an answer. So he asks the Rebbe, how come there was no answer? And the Rebbe says, every time you do something good, you want a pat on the shoulder? It's not about reward, and it's not about fame and fortune. We love to do the right thing because it's right. Stop bribing me as if I'm some kind of child. But that's the assumption. The assumption is, what's in it for me is the average person's question. But it's not, like President Kennedy's speech proved. Stop bribing me. I have more idealism than that.
It's interesting how along those lines, one of the last talks, most famous talks the Rabbi gave was along those lines, where the Rabbi said that I have done my job, I have done all that I can do. Now I'm giving it over to you. It's up to you. In other words, if we can say, the Rebbe is almost or maybe giving the responsibility to us. Now, how those words were difficult then and continue to be difficult to those close to the Rebbe, who relied on him, who depended on him. They were very uncomfortable to the extent that many resisted the simple and literal meaning of those words.
Remember that minister, Israeli minister, who asked the Rebbe, did you light my fire?
Yeah.
And the Rebbe's answer was, I gave you the match. Now you can light your own fire. In that talk that upset so many people, the Rebbe's actual words were, I've done everything I could do. The only thing left that I still can do is give it over to you. I think that's significant. It's not, I've run out of ideas, so I'm giving it over to you. I can give it over to you. There's a lot of meaning to that. I've prepared you, I've educated you, I've inspired you, and yes, you are ready to take over. I can give it over to you. That's an amazing statement, both about us and about the Rebbe. People thought, smart people thought that without the Rebbe, it would all fall apart. And it was pretty justified. Because in normal, uh, historically, when a leader of that caliber and uh, of that level, when that leader goes, the movement goes. What they didn't understand is that the Rebbe was an educator, not a charismatic leader. The fact that the Rebbe could say, I can give it over to you, that is not failure. That is the ultimate success on his part. And it's a great compliment to us. So are we doing it without him? No, we're not doing it without him. We are imbued with his information, with his knowledge, with his inspiration, with it. We picked it up. We got it. That is amazing.
We've got time for just one or two more questions. So obviously, the idea we speak about the antidote to Sinat Chinam is Avas Yisrael, or Avat Chinam, which means to say that naturally disposed love to another Jew. It's axiomatic with the Hasidic movement. If you can capture the Rebbe's, everything he tried to achieve was to implement that in this world, and obviously that is summed up with that beautiful statement from Hillel, where he's asked by the convert to sum up the entire Torah whilst he's standing on one foot, and he says, "That which you do not like done to yourself, do not do unto others." That is the entire Torah, and the rest is just commentary. Everything else, and there's lots, is just commentary on that one condition. So my question to you is like this: as you're able to do in a short and concise way, how does standing on one foot, how do you explain that statement? I think Rashi asks the question, how, when you capture and sum up Judaism in one line, don't you even mention the word God? So how do you understand that statement? And number two, do you think that enough emphasis is placed by religious leaders, educational institutions, or just religious leaders of communities on the Bein Adam Lachavere, on our relationship between man and our fellow man? Or is it wanting?
You really can't separate the two. What Hillel said, this is the essence of Judaism and the rest is commentary. How is it the essence of Judaism? It is not written anywhere. Hillel made it up. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, what is hateful to you, don't do to others. So how can that be the essence of Torah? The man who came to convert obviously believed in God. He wanted to become a Jew. What he was asking was, what's the minimum requirement so that I can get my feet wet and start my journey as a Jew? So he went to Shammai. That's the rest of the story. Before he came to Hillel, he went to Shammai. He said to Shammai, what's the minimum requirement? Shammai said, love your fellow Jew as yourself. The man said, every Jew? Hillel said, yeah. He said, sorry, that is not helpful, and he ran away. That's minimum requirement? It's undoable. So he ran to Hillel. Not to get another opinion from another rabbi like we often do. We don't like one rabbi's answer, so we run to the other one. He came to Hillel and said, can you explain to me what Shammai just told me? How is that doable? So Hillel said, break it down to little increments. How do you love your fellow Jew before you get to love him as much as yourself? The first step is don't do to him what you don't want done to you. That's like boot camp in Avos Yisrael. So he was actually saying the essence of Torah is Avos Yisrael. But if you need it broken down into bite-sized pieces, so the first step in Avos Yisrael is at least do no damage, do no harm. So Hillel was actually agreeing with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, love your fellow Jew as yourself. That's the entire Torah. Only Hillel knew how to make it digestible to a guy standing on one foot. So really, how is it that the rest of Torah is a commentary? You can say this is the biggest of all the mitzvahs. But what does it mean? The entire Torah is a commentary on how to love your fellow Jew? What about fasting on Yom Kippur? Or shaking the lulav and esrog? So in understanding Rabbi Akiva's statement that loving your fellow Jew is a klal godol b'Torah, he's not saying it's the biggest mitzvah. He's saying it's a cardinal principle in Torah. What he's implying is there is your Ahavas Yisrael, which is your mitzvah, and then there is God's love of Jews, of his people, which is the entire Torah. So the rest is commentary means you do your part, and the rest is God's commentary on how he loves Jews. Between the two of you, Jews should be in pretty good shape. If everybody loves them, they'll be well taken care of, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So when you're studying Torah and you don't understand what you're studying. It's because you don't see the love that God is expressing. Because every word in Torah is God's Ahavas Yisrael.
Interesting. You know, certain things they say in life are simple but not easy. Finally, our last question for tonight. The Rabbi encouraged always the application of these very novel and beautiful ideas on a practical level. So can you suggest 3 practical steps that can help simple Jews, all Jews, achieve that state of love to one's fellow, or even as Hillel said, don't do unto others what you don't want others done to you.
At least don't be nasty. I think the best way to do it is the Rebbe's way. There are 3 steps to everything: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. To make a habit of giving tzedakah every day. That will enhance your Avos Yisrael. Every day, your hand is in the habit of putting a few coins into the pushka, into the charity box, because you're thinking of other Jews who may need what you have more than you do. That's in action. Gemilas Chasadim. Then in prayer, there are people who need you to pray for them, to say a little Tehillim for them. Or the world itself needs your Tehillim. You get into the habit of saying a prayer not because you need, but because the world needs. The Jewish people need. Your neighbor needs. So pray not only for yourself, but for them as well. And then when you study Torah, any part of Torah, look for the love that God is expressing. Well, the Seder Umeira, the rebellious son.
Yeah.
The Torah says that if he doesn't listen to his parents and he eats too much and drinks too much, you have him stoned to death. Where is the love? But if you're looking for it, you'll find it. It doesn't say have him stoned to death. It says you might want to kill him, but you can't. Bring him to Besdin. If the Besdin finds him guilty, then they'll stone him to death. So what is it saying? It's saying just because you're a frustrated parent doesn't mean your kid should suffer. So the Gemara says that it never happened. In all of Jewish history, it never happened that a child was executed because of his behavior. Why did it never happen? Because the parents couldn't do it. And in the courts, what court is going to find a 13-year-old boy worthy of? So the Torah is not saying kill him. The Torah is saying you can't kill him. And you look at the Arab world, if your child brings shame to the family, you kill him. God, loving his people, says, no way, you do not do that. So if you look for the love, you will find it.
And finally, to end off on a more basic level, can I ask you two questions? Number one, what's the best bit of advice you have ever received from someone?
The best bit of advice?
Yeah.
Like the best criticism?
Anything which has made a strong impression on you.
Well, as a child, I had a great uncle, my grandfather's brother. Very simple, very quiet, very gentle soul. Nebuch, he never had children, and his wife was not well, and she passed away. And he would eat supper at our house. Actually, it was in 1414 President Street before it became the dormitory.
That's in Brooklyn, New York, right?
Yes, Crown Heights, the heart of Crown Heights. So we had a little apartment there, and he would come for dinner. Hardly ever spoke. Very gentle, quiet soul, but very, very moral, very principled. Anyway, so we're sitting at the table. He's sitting across from me. My mother is right behind me, standing at the sink. There's literally no empty space between us. It's a little tiny kitchen. I say to my mother, Ma, can I have a spoon? This gentle, quiet man had a fit of, he turned purple. And he said in Yiddish, how dare you use your mother? Wat nutzen sich mit dem Mammen? And then he like, oh, sorry, not my place to say. And that's it. It was, that reaction was so amazingly, like, to this day. I mean, every time I would come home to my mother, she would say, would you like a cup of tea? And I was like, is Fatah Chaim around? Will he come scream at me? The mitzvah of honoring your parents includes what is hateful to you, don't do to others. At least don't use your mother. You're supposed to be doing the simple tasks for her. Asking her to do a simple task for you? To Uncle Chaim, that was like the most vile, objectionable, unthinkable behavior. Jungle, what is this? Using your mother as a shortcut? Get up and get the spoon yourself. We neglect that very badly. People don't even think twice. They call their mother and say, can you run an errand for me? That is so against the fifth commandment. So that
I hope,
really,
I hope there are a lot of children out there listening to this, and many of us are children in varying stages in their lives. One final question. One of the richest words in the Jewish language, in Yiddish, is the word mensch. What does the word mensch mean to you?
it is meant to drive you crazy. It is purposely left vague so that you're always guessing. I remember that frustration, you know? Like I would get up from the table and somebody would say to me, clear away your plate, be a mensch. I thought, okay, so a mensch clears up after himself. And then all of a sudden, like, did you finish your homework? Nah, get your homework done, be a mensch. Whoa, whoa, whoa. A mensch clears away the table. Eventually I found out it means whatever you want it to mean, and no one will ever tell you what the precise definition is, so that you're always worried, am I being a mensch?
Rabbi Friedman, thank you very, very much for that fascinating insights and humor and novel ideas. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to be inspired about, and certainly to provoke many of us to think a little differently and to challenge us and to empower us during these very challenging times. We thank you again for joining us, and we wish you and all your family much success in all your endeavors, but most importantly, health and nachas from all your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, and they should have a lot of nachas from you too. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
At the risk of stating the obvious, this was not easy for me. It's very intimidating to speak to someone with such a beautiful accent. You feel totally
Thank you so much. Deeply appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening.
Sei gesund. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? You know, I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects, but that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on, if you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat, which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it, you'll like it.